The play The Boy Comes Home is a light-hearted comedy which is written by Alan Alexander Milne. It is a one-act play which revolves around two chief characters, namely Philip, who is a soldier and has just returned home. He is 23 years old, having spent in the army for 4 years. He has returned home and he is living with his uncle. In the play, we call this uncle as Uncle James. He also has his Aunt Emily. She is a minor character. And also we have Mrs. Higgins, the cook, and Mary. These are 5 characters. So among these 5 characters in this play, the two main characters are Uncle James and Philip. It revolves around these two characters. The play starts on the day after the war, with Philip coming down to breakfast in his uncle's house 2 hours later than the rest of the household and asking the maid for breakfast. If we look at the playwright Alan Alexander Milne, he is popularly known for his creation Winnie the Pooh, but he was also an accomplished novelist, playwright, and a poet. Born on 18th January 1882 in London, England, A. Milne worked as a journalist for several years and as an assistant editor of Punch. He also served in the army as a soldier during the First World War as well as the Second World War. If we look at the play, it is a one-act comedy and is named The Boy Comes Home. The title refers to the boy, Philip, who has returned home after serving 4 years in the army. Philip is a young man, a soldier, who has been fighting in France. He is a promising young man with a strong and pleasant personality. He is 23 years old and has learned a lot from his experience as a soldier or from his experience after facing the war. As we look at the play, we will also come to know about his personality, from being a boy to becoming a mature man. The central conflict is the generation gap, which is represented by Philip and Uncle James. The older generation is of the opinion that the younger generation need to have more respect for the older generation, whereas the younger generation believe that they are mature enough to make their own decision or take their own decision. This is the central conflict in the play. The time period is the World War. That is, it is right after the World War, post-World War. If we look at the character of Philip, Philip is the central character in the play. He is a pleasant-looking young man of 23. He has recently returned home from war after spending 4 years in the trenches, or in the army basically. His parents are no more, and therefore he lives with his uncle James and Aunt Emily. His relationship with his uncle has always been problematic up till now, 23 years old, and up till now his relationship with his uncle is not really smooth sailing. It is still problematic. The problem is Philip doesn't like his uncle's authoritative attitude and his strict discipline in the house. Philip says to uncle in one line, "Well, we don't get on too well together." That is spoken by Philip. As we have talked earlier, when you read the play, or as you try to understand the play, the pivotal point which you need to keep in mind is the generation gap in society in the context of the conflict between Uncle James and Philip. Again, if we look at the character of Philip and Uncle James, the difference of opinion, their differences, or the problem which they have against each other, is the difference of opinion between Uncle James and Philip, which is indicative of the generation gap. There's always some gap between the older generation and the younger generation. This gap is expressed by the difference of values. The younger generation is always a little different in the process of accepting and rejecting certain values. In the play, we find that Uncle James demands unquestioned obedience from his nephew, considering it his right, being the elder in the family. But Philip thinks freedom and independence as his first rights, which cannot be taken away by any person. If we look at the character of Uncle James is a successful businessman who has been making a lot of money even during the time of war. His personality is not really impressive. He has a weak physique, thin beard, and unimpressive stature. But he has made his image as a disciplinarian and strict person. In his house, he has strictly implemented all orders, and no one cannot go against him. It's his house, he makes the rules, he has the financial power in the palm of his hand. As we read the play, we will also come across the use of humor. Remember, this is a light-hearted comedy. It is a comedy. Another important thing which you need to understand is the breakfast scene, where Philip gets up late. He asks for breakfast. Miss Mary is not so sure whether she should do it or not, because the cook, Mrs. Higgins, is a strict person. She, under the authority of Uncle James, believes that she should not make any breakfast after 8 o'clock. As you read the play, keep in mind the breakfast scene. Another important scene which you need to keep in mind is the dream of Uncle James, or which Uncle James experience in the play. And the main conflict in the play, that is the generation gap, which we have talked earlier. Remember the two main characters, Uncle James and Uncle James and Philip. Let us look at the short summary of the play. The play is set in Uncle James' house, where Philip is inside and he has woken up and he wants breakfast after the usual hour, as commanded or as ordered by Uncle James. Nobody can have breakfast after 8 a.m. But Philip has returned home from war and wants his breakfast after 8. It's already past 8 and he wants breakfast. He asks Mary, the servant, to get something to eat. She's afraid of the cook, Mrs. Higgins. Here we need to have a little sympathy for Mary, because Mary is stuck in between Uncle James and Philip. She wants to offer Philip breakfast, but she is also afraid of Mrs. Higgins and Uncle James. So she is now torn in between. And Mary, who is not so sure, told Philip that she wasn't sure whether she should make breakfast for him because of Mrs. Higgins' strict attitude and also Uncle James. However, Philip orders Mary to go and prepare breakfast for him. At that time, Aunt Emily enters and seems very caring about Philip. She asks about his stay in the trenches. Then we come to know that Philip does not like much about his Uncle James just because he is strict. The scene is in Uncle James' house in Cromwell Road. It is the day right after the war. It is a house which is heavily furnished, mid-Victorian style. Philip comes in from the hall and goes to the dining room, but he did not find anything to eat or to have his breakfast. So he ordered Mary, the parlor maid, to make some breakfast for him. However, Mary just coldly told him, "Breakfast has been cleared long ago. It's past breakfast time now. I don't think you'll get any breakfast." "Exactly. That is why I called you. Bring me a couple of eggs or something, and coffee and not tea." So I'm not so sure about Mrs. Higgins. I am not so sure about her. Philip asked her, "Who is Mrs. Higgins?" Mrs. Higgins is a cook and she doesn't like being put about by others. Aunt Emily is also introduced in the play. She is a kind-hearted mid-Victorian lady who has never had any desire for the vote. It's written who has never had any desire for the vote. She is someone who is contented with her life, and she is not really bothered about what is going outside her house. She is contented, she is satisfied with her life inside the house, not really bothered about the outside world. She is very kind to Philip. "There you are, Philip. Did you sleep well?" She has a good relationship with Philip, and so does Philip with her. As we have looked at Philip, he's 23 years old and he gets up late in the morning. Because of that, breakfast has been cleared. So he calls the parlor maid, Mary, to ask her to bring breakfast for him. Mary hesitates and says that she doesn't know what Mrs. Higgins will say. Mary tells him that breakfast is sharp at 8 a.m. and is still the rule as it had been before he went to war. Mary goes and Aunt Emily comes in. Philip at once intervenes and asks Mary to tell Mrs. Higgins to come and meet him. Aunt Emily hesitates and says that I don't know what Mrs. Higgins will say. Philip pleasantly says that he wants to know and for all what will she say. And an extremely aggressive lady comes in. She is none other than Mrs. Higgins and talks in a domineering style to Philip and tells him that she will not make any breakfast after 8. Philip talks to her in an authoritative style and tells her to make breakfast. Go and make breakfast, Mrs. Higgins. I told you, go and make breakfast. After hearing Philip's words, Mrs. Higgins demands that she should be given a notice in the sense that I quit. I'm going to quit my job. Why? Philip is being too bad and I cannot continue like this. He's dictating what I should do and what I should not do. The rule is still at 8. It is said by Uncle James and I am supposed to follow the rules said by Uncle James, not Philip. And Philip wants me to prepare his breakfast now. I quit. I'm done. At that point, Philip did not beg Mrs. Higgins to stay. Instead, Philip gives her wages to her instead of a notice and tells her that she may go at once. Take this, take your salary as well, and leave this house. That proved to be a very successful strategy, and now Mrs. Higgins is scared. She is intimidated and trying to recover herself. She says, if it's only a bit of breakfast, I don't say but what I mightn't get it if asked decent. This episode, it sets the tone of the whole play because it indicates the strength of Philip's personality and it further shows that nobody will be able to make him agree to his or her wishes. This is the first part of the play. In the next part, we will look at the dream scene and the final scene. Thank you.